and Andalusia, which is in Iberia, today known as Spain and Portugal, but specifically in Spain, that particular city. And in Seville, that city is also in Spain. There was a municipal council of native Negroes with fraternal orders, kings and overseers. The Negro came from the Negro came first to the Indies from Spain. So there's a misinformation that's often put out there. A lot of people assume that so-called Negro slaves were first brought over into the Americas, and they were brought over from Africa, but that's not according to history. So it says from Spain, not from Africa. All right. I'm gonna kind of dance around. It says the mulatto was not made in America. He came to us already made from the mother country. So that's another thing that I want to deal with. That whole thing about being light-skinned, even with us going into the history of Israelites, the Israelite diaspora in Europe. A lot of people automatically think of it exclusively as history that only has to do with so-called black people. But we got to remember that we're Israelites as a nation of people, all right? What you'll find out, a lot of people think that folks didn't get light-skinned until things started happening over here. But according to the history and according to what makes sense, folks were light-skinned before they came over here, all right? Makes sense? Want to show, I won't be able to show you this, but I'm going to go through a few little things. Just a couple of terms to familiarize yourself with. We think of the word black a lot of times, right? And we automatically have an idea of what we believe to be black. If I may, I'm going to call out a few people, all right? Usually when we think black, stand up, Barack. We think of something that look like that. All right. You stand up if you want to. We think of that right there too, right? All right. So now watch this. The sister right there, Emily, stand up. Cassandra, stand up. Now, when we look at them, a lot of us say, okay, still black, light skin, right? Your call, stand up. Y'all remain standing for a second. Now your call happens to be darker than both of them. But we may look at him and say, nah, not black. Even though he's darker, he's closer to the color black than they are. Why is it? All right. So I want us to begin. You guys can have a seat. Thank you so much. I want to start to retrain our minds because, you know, a lot of times we are tribal by nature, but we get so far caught up in the various different classifications that were placed upon us. All right. So the word black, literally, when you go into the dictionary and you definitely go into like older dictionaries, the word black also not only means the color black, such as, can you stand up for me real quick, Hanani? His shirt being black, but it also meant his skin tone. All right. Black simply meant, appreciate it, a person of color. All right. Usually depicting a person not only of color, but a person more so darker in color. All right. Or darker in shade, so to speak. There were different terms that were placed upon the people. You'd hear, go ahead. Tell us what reference it is. Oh, this right here? Man, I have all my references that I'll give you. Because, I'm not going to even lie to you. I don't want to lie to you. I believe this particular one is African Presence. But I'll give it to you. And anybody else that wants, I have a list of them, and I can give them to you. All right. Dusky. Dusky was a term that was utilized. Dusky means somewhat dark, having little light, dim, shadowy. It also means having dark skin. All right. So these are terms that we're using in the English language that we don't necessarily use as much. Some of you guys, if you're a little bit older, you might have heard of the word jetty. How many of you guys have ever heard of that word, jetty? Maybe not. So jetty is another term that was used. It says resembling jet, especially in color, of a deep black. So a lot of times that was a person that was very, very dark skinned. All right. Here was a common one that was used in the English language back when. You guys have probably, some of you guys, at least some of you guys that have done some research have heard of this one. Swarthy. All right. How many of you guys have heard of the word swarthy? All right. Swarthy, it says of skin color, complexion, etc. Dark. All right. So peoples of a dark skin tone or a color were called swarthy, which was synonymous with the word black. In translation, a lot of times they began to use the word black instead of these various different terms that basically meant of color. All right. So even when you go into the dictionary and you look at the term black, you'll see definitions like relating to black people, of any human group having dark colored skin. All right. Especially of African or Australian Aboriginal ancestry. You get another definition right here. The color black, ink. The meaning, dark-skinned person. Terms like blackamoor that our people were called back when. All right. Now, something that I want to bring your attention to, you don't necessarily have to go to it, but if you like, feel free. You can go to Genesis chapter 30. All right. There are a couple of verses. I'm going to focus on a few. I think 32 would be the first one. And in 32, the word brown actually comes up. All right. Now, here's the funny thing. If you get a different translation, a different Bible translation, like the ESV, it actually translates that same word into black. But in the King James, it's brown. But it's not utilized. This particular word is not utilized to describe describe humans. It's actually utilized in this case to describe animals. All right. So the Hebrew word would be H2345. All right. And it literally means dark colored. All right. (2345), and I believe you pronounce it Kawam. All right. Meaning dark color, darkened, dark brown or black. Also meaning sunburnt or swarthy, blackish, brown. You guys have heard of that show Blackish? So blackish, brown. And let me go and show you one. Well, I'm not showing you, but telling you. I'm gonna kind of rush through this. When you go to Songs of Solomon, chapter 1, and you look at verse 5, when he says, "I am black but comely," all right, you look up that word, and that word is H7835, all right, and it means swarthy or black or blackish, and it comes from the root H7836, means to be black. H7836 literally means to don. That is figuratively be up early at any task. By extension, to search for, inquire, rise, betimes, seek. Early in the morning. To seek early or earnestly, look early or earnestly, look early or diligently for. So what's so funny about it? It's not a class about the new moon, But even right here, this could be utilized to prove the point that, especially in the Hebrew language, early was one and the same as dark. The beginning, B times, was one and the same as dark or black. All right. So there's a correlation there. So let's get back. Let's go into early Jewish diaspora, the scattering of the Israelites. I know it's kind of small. What you're going to find is throughout various different times in history, our people, the Israelites, were not only scattered, so to speak, but more specifically, migrated, fled, were taken captive, all those different things into all of these different places. But today we're specifically going to concentrate on Europe. All right. So a lot of people may not be too familiar. If you had to take a whack at it, where would you say Europe began on the west for the most part, and where would it end?
I can't even see the words. I want to say around Macedonia.
Macedonia? That's where Europe ends? That's where it begins? It begins right here and goes over to where? This right here? Okay. All right, good guess. Let me get one more person. Look, you like, no. Come on. Let's see what you got. Okay.
To, I think it was Diaspora.
So way up here?
Yeah.
How
Cutting down to their Antioch.
Antioch?
Yeah.
Okay. How many of y'all agree with him? He basically said all of that. How many of y'all agree? How many disagree? Man, it's a whole of y'all, a lot of y'all that don't agree or disagree. Yeah. So here's the thing. This right here is known as Asia Minor. This is technically not Europe. All right. This is technically not Europe up here. All right. When you're dealing with Europe, you're dealing with this land, small land mass up there. All right. So that's what we're going to be dealing with today. So now, the Jewish diaspora, 70 AD. How many of you guys have heard of 70 AD? You're familiar with that, all right? When the Israelites left or fled Jerusalem at that time, one thing that we got to remember is they did not all go down into Africa, all right? Israelites also migrated or fled into different areas, all right? And many of them actually went up into Europe. And this shows some of the places where they went. Some of these names should sound familiar, all right? Of course, like we said, that's Asia Minor over there. But over in Europe, you got places like Thessalonica, Athens, Rome, right? These are places that you probably heard of. All right. The funny thing about it is Europe is so close to northern Africa, even to a point you see it where it's almost connected. That's called the Strait of Gibraltar. That area above is called the Iberian Peninsula. Literally, the word Iberia means the land of the Hebrews, Ibar. All right. The Hebrews used to rule that land, but you're going to find out that the Hebrews used to do more than just rule that land. They pretty much ruled all of Europe. All right. Iberia today consists of Spain and Portugal, by the way. So here's a kind of a quick look. Paul's 3 journeys. The first journey, some of the places that he went into Cyprus, which is right off the coast of Asia Minor, below it, right? That's the first journey. He really didn't go off into Europe. But if I'm not mistaken, on the second and on the third journey, he did go into places in Europe. Places like Corinth, Philippi, Thessalonica, all right? So, this map says the Jews in the Roman world, all right? This is one of the maps during the time of the rule of Rome, all right? Now, it's very tricky, some things that we're going to talk about, because maps don't stay the same. Territories change from time to time because people have conflicts. They conquer one another, all right? During this time, it says around 200 AD, right? This is pretty much what it looked like. The circles that are filled in that are completely black, according to this map, those are large Israelite communities. Places like Corinth, Ephesus, all right? Ephesus, of course, is in Asia Minor. So let's focus on Corinth and Rome. And then you had the places that have the circles without the filling. And you got places like Greece, different places in Greece, Thessalonica, Philippi, even Sparta, which we'll talk about. Also over in Spain, or Iberia, as it used to be called, places like Cordoba, all right? Israelites were in all these different places by 200 AD. Here's another look, a little bit further in time, 650 AD, all right? Here's a quick flash to kind of look at some of the kingdoms and try to kind of understand. This was the Roman Empire, but at a different time. What you'll find is, even though there was an empire, within that empire, you had different kingdoms, all right? Different kingdoms. So let's get into some scriptures real quick. Let's go to Matthew chapter 10.
And what verse?
Start at verse 5 through 7, and then we'll drop down to verse 11.
Matthew chapter 10, verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, Go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans.
So what he was telling them, he said, go not into the way of the Gentiles. These specific Gentiles were talking about other nations. He said, don't go to the other nations. And he said, don't go to the Samaritans, because there's some history with that. Back during the time of, whose rule was that? After the rule of Solomon, I believe it was during Rehoboam's rule. Don't quote me if I'm wrong. Somebody actually correct me if I'm wrong. Long story short, the Israelites ended up going into Assyria, into captivity, all right? Those Israelites happened to be of the northern kingdom, all right? The capital city of the northern kingdom was what? Samaria, all right? So when those Israelites actually went into Assyria as captives, I forgot the name of the king, he actually sent Hamites into that land to inhabit that land, all right? You can read about that in Kings. I believe 2 Kings, right?
Yeah, 17:24.
Who was that? King Hoshea? The water, I appreciate it. And what was the name of the king that sent the Hamites up in there? It was Shalmaneser? It was? Okay. And he sent Hamites over into the land. So there were still Hamites over in the land. That's why Yahweh Shah said, don't go to them, but go ahead and read. Verse 6.
But go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
He said, but go rather into the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Go to the places where the Israelites are at. Read.
As ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
He said, preach to them and say the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Drop down to verse 11.
Verse 11. And into whatsoever city or town ye shall enter, inquire who in it is worthy.
So now you got to pay attention to the details. He said, in whatever city you go in, inquire who in it is worthy. This is a special indication of something in particular. What he was telling them was, wherever you go, you have to find out who the people are there and where the Israelites happen to be at in those places, because those are the people that would be worthy. All right, go ahead.
And there abide till ye go thence.
All right, so go from there. Go to Hosea chapter 8 and verse 8.
Hosea chapter 8 verse 8. Israel is swallowed up. Now shall they be among the Gentiles, as a vessel wherein is no pleasure.
So what you're going to find out at that time, what was happening, the Israelites began to be scattered amongst the other nations. And amongst those other nations, at the time when they weren't doing so well, we weren't doing well as a nation, the Most High would put us into various different captivities. We went into captivities under a lot of different nations. A lot of those captivities you don't hear a whole lot about, but you can read about them in the book of Judges. A lot of those were smaller captivities. They were only so many years, right? Now, with that being said, he said you will be amongst the other nations as a vessel wherein is no pleasure. Meaning what? The same way we are in this land and all the different lands that we're in today. We're not treated like the people that we should be treated as the people who once ruled the earth, the people who invented so many different things and did so many different great things. We're not treated like that, but we're treated as the bottom of society. All right, go from there. Go to Micah chapter 5 and verse 7. Y'all with me? Are you falling asleep? Might have to call on somebody. You don't think I'll call on you, huh?
Ready? Micah chapter 5 verse 7.
Go ahead.
And the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people, as a dew from the Lord.
Now here's the thing. He said the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people, as a dew from the Lord. Now let me ask you something. You have to look at the attributes of what it is that he's describing. He said as the dew. When you wake up in the morning and you look upon your car, look upon your grass, right? Is there a little bit of dew? Oftentimes, is the dew concentrated in one specific area and pretty much not touching anything else? It's usually spread out, right? And it's pretty much spread over everything. All right. So these are things that you have to pay attention to. Read on. Verse 7.
Yeah, verse 7. And the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people, as the dew of the Lord, as the shower upon the grass.
So as the showers upon the grass, that's another thing that we got to look at. Anytime you got light rain or even rain or what have you, and you see those droplets, it's everywhere. Go ahead.
That tarrieth not for men, nor waiteth for the sons of men.
Go ahead.
And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people.
So hold on. First he said that tarrieth not for man, nor waiteth for the sons of men. Meaning what? One thing that you got to understand about the Israelites, a lot of times we have it in our mind, like in most times in history, the Israelites were always together in one specific place. No, that's not the case. When it says they don't tarry for any man and they don't wait for the sons of men, the Israelites were spreading early on, going to these different places and inhabiting these different places. Yes, you have specific events that were big events or big migrations, right? But you also have a situation where all throughout history, Israelites began to migrate into these various different places. Read on. Verse 8 again.
And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles, in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of the sheep, who, if he go through both, treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver.
So what he's saying is, he said, you're amongst the nations, but you're the most ferocious. He said, if you really had it in your mind to tear some stuff down, nobody would be able to stop you. That's the thing about our people that we don't realize. We so afraid of Esau. Well, Esau got guns. He got weapons. It's so many of us, and we got such a spirit on us that nothing would be able to stop us but the Heavenly Father if we decided to tear this place up. Remember the Los Angeles riots, right? All right. So watch this. Go to Esther chapter 13 in the Apocrypha. Yep. And I want verse 3 through 5.
Esther 13.
Yes, sir. 13, 3 through 5.
Esther chapter 13, verse 3. Now when I asked my counselors how this might be brought to pass, a man,
which is Haman,
yeah,
right? Same Haman that's spoken about in the rest of Esther, right? The Edomite that set out to destroy the whole nation of Israel, right? Go ahead.
a man that excelleth in wisdom among us, and was approved for his constant good will and steadfast fidelity, and had the honor of the second place in the kingdom, declared unto us that in all nations throughout the world there was scattered a certain malicious people that had laws contrary to all nations.
So this is the way he was painting the picture of our people. He said a certain malicious people who had laws different from all the other peoples. So people ask all the time, we try to figure out, well, there are Israelites in all these places, but how do we know who the Israelites are in that place? How many of you guys have ever wondered that? We say, okay, well, I know that there are Israelites in Africa. I know that there are Israelites in Europe. But how do we know who's an Israelite and who's not? All right. One of the things was you always had a situation where the Israelites may be among the people, but they never got totally absorbed into any people. All right. Just like a reference in the book of Daniel says the clay and the iron. Even though you put them together, they never quite totally mesh. So that's how our nation of people have always been in these various different nations. What you'll find out, Israelites definitely lived amongst other nations of people, including Edomites. But the Israelites always did their thing. And they always seemed to somehow find a way to excel. All right. Even in captivity. This is probably the only captivity that we were really just put in a position where the Most High said, I'm going to strip you of everything. You're not getting back up to the top. But in other captivities, one advantage that we had in the various different captivities that we went into was we began to learn the different languages of all these different captivities. So a lot of our people actually spoke various different languages. All right. They were multilingual. Go ahead and read.
That had laws contrary to all nations.
And that's the thing, too. We always carried our customs with us. So a lot of times, even in different places, you say, OK, well, what kind of stuff do they do? Well, they practice this. They got something similar to this law. OK, man, they probably are of the 12 tribes of Israel. Read.
And continually despise the commandments of the kings, so as the uniting of our kingdoms honorably intended by us cannot go forward.
So at that time he was upset because he was like, man, they're making it hard for us to unite the kingdom. They're coming against pretty much everything that we're saying that should be. They're saying, nah, same way we do right now. We difficult. Go ahead.
Seeing then we understand that this people alone is continually in opposition unto all men, differing in the strange manner of their laws, and evil affecting our state, working all the mischief they can, that our kingdom may not be firmly established.
So that was the thing. A lot of times throughout history, you saw that over and over throughout history. The Israelites' presence in these different places would not allow the other nations to fully establish their kingdoms in the strength that they would like. They would have difficulties a lot of times with the Israelites. Go from there. Go to Tobit, chapter 13 and verse 3. So even like that, this particular scripture, it's the same thing that's happening right now. You got Israelites that are pretty much rising up all over the earth. Other nations are trying to figure out, how in the world can this be? It's the valley of the dry bones. Tobit chapter 13 and verse 3.
Verse 3, confess him before the Gentiles, ye children of Israel.
So the Bible said, confess him before the Gentiles. Meaning what? We're amongst the Gentiles. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're confessing the Heavenly Father before the Gentiles here in America, over in Europe, so on and so forth. Read.
For he hath scattered us among them.
He scattered us amongst all of the different nations. Go from there. Go to Zechariah chapter 7 and verse 14.
Zechariah chapter 7 verse 14. But I scattered them with with a whirlwind among all the nations.
The Bible says amongst all the nations, not limited to a few, all the nations. Read.
Whom they knew not. Thus the land was desolate after them, that no man passed through nor returned, for they laid the pleasant land desolate.
Indeed, indeed. So let me show you something. On that screen right there, how many of you guys have ever heard of the Visigoths? Okay. How many of you guys have heard of the Franks? Okay. How many of you guys have heard of the Celts? I know a lot of y'all like the Boston Celtics, right? Or you're at least familiar with them, right? Okay. All right. Question. Bless you. Barakatah. Who are these people? Who are these different tribes, kingdoms? Who are these people? How many of you guys know who these people were? Definitively. Huh? Some of them up here, the Franks, the Visigoths, the Celts. You got the Saxons, right? You got the, shucks. You got the Saxons, you got, can't think of any of the other ones right now. Let me see. Basically, you got what were called the Germanic tribes. You had a lot of different tribes amongst those that were labeled Germanic tribes. All right. So now here's the thing. How many of you guys have actually heard of the Holy Roman Empire? All right. How many of you guys are really familiar with the history of the Holy Roman Empire? Few of you. All right. So let me ask this question. What does the Holy Roman Empire have to do with the Germanic tribes? Anybody? You want to take a whack at it? Give them a mic.
Can we get some volume on this mic? Mic 2, turn it back up.
The Germanic tribes, like being that they were indigenous there, they were pretty much fighting against the expansion of the Holy Roman Empire.
Okay.
That's pretty much it.
That's it. So what happened in their fight against the expansion of the Holy Roman Empire?
Eventually, the Roman Empire, they took over and they kind of got integrated in, like there's the system.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Anybody? All right. Let me ask you another question. All right. So the Holy Roman Empire was basically the Roman Empire on the West for the most part, because you also had the Byzantine Empire, right? All right, the Byzantine Empire. All right. So now you're saying that these Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Franks, Saxons, Celts, so on and so forth, that they pretty much fought against the expansion of the Holy Roman Empire, right? And then they were absorbed. Before the split of the East and the West. That happened. Okay. Bit confused, right? A little bit. Don't sound like you're too confident. That's the thing about this history, the history of Europe. What happened with the history of Europe, it was so skewed by Esau, because Esau tells you, hey, this is my history, right? To the point where you don't know what's what. And a lot of times we haven't done enough research, so we don't know much about the time period and what was what. So we're taking a guess. We may find out a little bit of history over here. We read a little bit about these people. We read a little bit about these people. And then we're left kind of to our own imagination to try to figure out how it all makes sense. Does that make sense? All right. So I want to shed some light on that today. All right. So here's another image or map of the Holy Roman Empire, right? Now, what you'll find is Kingdom of Germany, right? Which was comprised of many of the quote unquote Germanic tribes. It was actually a part of the Holy Roman Empire. All right. The Holy Roman Empire was ruled by the holy people, the only people that called themselves the holy people, which were who? The Israelites. All right. As a matter of fact, in any of you guys heard of a guy by the name of Septimius Severus? He played a big part in the Holy Roman Empire, becoming the Holy Roman Empire, because prior to that, Edomites actually ran the Roman Empire. That was known as the Greco-Roman Empire. All right. It says, as a matter of fact, another thing that a lot of people don't understand is the papacy. When we talk about the papacy, we're talking about, the Catholic Church. All right. The inception of the Catholic Church was not Esau. Esau did not create the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church actually was Jake's. It was Israelites that actually were the original papacy, the popes. This is an image of an Israelite man. His name is Pope Eugene. All right. The thing was, I know this image is kind of hard to see. Well, this one is a little bit better. You had the papacy, which basically kind of had its own jurisdiction, if you will. It wasn't necessarily governed by the same laws and constraints of the rest of the empire. And then the rest of it was the Holy Roman Empire. Some of the other names you might have heard of, like the Burgundies, Bohemia, so on and so forth. All right. Go from there. Go to 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 37.
8 and 37.
Yep, 8 and 37. We'll read 37 through 39.
1 Kings chapter 8, verse 37. If there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, or if they be or if there be caterpillar, if there, I'm gonna start from the beginning. If there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, or if there be caterpillar.
So one of the things that would cause our people to actually leave our homeland would be famine. All right, which we'll get an instance of that in a minute. All right, go ahead.
If there be enemy besieging them in the land of their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, what prayer.
So that was another thing. Various different sieges of our enemies. One of the most known amongst us probably would be the siege of 70 AD, Titus and Vespasian, right? The siege of Jerusalem. But there were other sieges as well, such as Babylon. Go ahead.
What prayer and supplications soever be made by any man, or by all the people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart, and spread forth his hand toward his house, toward this house. Then hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and forgive, and do, and give to every man according to his way, whose heart thou knowest. For thou only knowest the heart of all the children of men.
So basically, this was an indication. He was letting it be known that there were going to be Israelites that would be outside of Jerusalem. And they were instructed, if you're outside of Jerusalem in another place, in another land, you were instructed to pray towards Jerusalem. Go from there. Go to get Ruth chapter 1 and verse 1 and 2.
Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days that the judges ruled that there was famine in the land.
So this is one of those scenarios. This was a situation where there was a famine in the land. Go ahead.
And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the county of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Eliakim, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathah of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the county of Moab and continued there.
So this is, an example. When there was a famine in the land, our people would go to different places so that they could survive. It's just like even with the account of the Israelites going into Egypt. That was a move because if they had not gone into Egypt, they would have died. All right. So this happened. There are a couple of instances where it's documented in the scriptures, but there were other instances that are not necessarily documented or recorded here in scripture where Israelites had to go into these various different places. Go from there. Go to 1 Kings chapter 9. And I want verse 10.
First Kings chapter 9, verse 10. And it came to pass at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the 2 houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house. Now Hiram, the king of Tyre, had finished Solomon. Now Hiram, the king of Tyre, furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees, and with gold, according to all his desire. That the king Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities and the land of Galilee.
So you had a situation. Hiram was actually an African or a Hamitic king. All right. Solomon had a relationship with this African king. All right. To the point where Solomon even gave him gifts. Go ahead.
And Hiram came out from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they pleased him not. And he said, What cities are these which thou hast given me? my brother, and called them the land of Cabal unto this day.
So they had such a relationship to the point that king was even comfortable enough to call him my brother. You ever be on a job and you get acquainted with different people to the point where they call you they brother, especially of other nations? It's kind of one of them situations. It wasn't like a situation where Solomon all of a sudden was like, hey, you gonna make it into the kingdom. No, it wasn't that. It was just the fact that they acknowledged that there was a good relationship that they had. They really had kind of like a working relationship. It was things that Solomon needed. So, Solomon would give gifts and do things for him because he would do things for Solomon. Go ahead.
Verse 14, Hiram sent to the king 60 talents of gold. And this is the reason of the levy which King Solomon raised for to build the house of the Lord and his 2 houses and Millo and the wall of Jerusalem and Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer. For Pharaoh the king of Egypt had gone up and taken Gezer and burnt it with fire and slain the Canaanites that dwelled in the city and given it for a present unto his daughter Solomon's wife.
Go ahead.
And Solomon built Gezer and Beth Horon and
the Neither
and Baalath and Tadmor and the wilderness in the land and all the cities of store that Solomon had, and the cities for his chariots and cities for his horsemen, and that which Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. And all...
Go ahead.
Okay. And all the people that were left of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, which were not of the children of Israel.
So long story short, what Solomon was doing, Solomon had relationships and alliances with certain people, and he had problems. He was enemies with others, all right, to the point where just like anybody else would, he went and began to expand, right, his rulership into different areas and actually build up garrisons and defenses and things of that nature in these various different places. All right. That's what the Israelites did. It wasn't a situation where they just stayed in our land. They began to expand because that's what anybody would do. And especially when you're liable to be attacked by various different enemies, you have to begin to make sure that you're building up strongholds. Go ahead. As a matter of fact, drop down from there. Give me 26.
Verse 26. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber.
So Ezion-Geber is actually in Edom's original land. All right. So he went into the land of Edom, which obviously wasn't our allotment. But he said, hey, look, I need to make sure I got a port here so that I can utilize this to actually send my ships and trade and things of that nature. Go ahead.
Which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom.
Go ahead.
And Hiram sent in the navy, his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon.
So Solomon not only was going into different places on land, but even Solomon was actually going by sea to various different places. So just keep that in mind. Go from there. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. Let's get verse 13 through 17.
Deuteronomy 20, verse 13. And when the Lord thy God had delivered it into thy hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword. But the women and the little ones, and the cattle, and all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself. And thou shalt eat the spoil of thy enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee.
So this was a situation when Israel was going to war against different nations, and they would basically be in a state of conquest. They were conquering different peoples and even taking different lands. Israelites did that as well. Go ahead.
Thus shalt thou do unto all the cities which are very far off from thee, which are not of the cities of these nations.
So he said, thus shalt thou do unto all the cities which are very far off from thee. So we're not necessarily just talking about what? Some of the places that we're used to hearing about. Some of the places in the land that we know where the Israelites were at. He said, but also places that were afar off. It would be safe to say that Europe was fairly far off, right? Go ahead.
But of these cities, of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that nothing that breatheth, but thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee.
So basically he was saying, and these specifically are Canaanite tribes, he said, look, of the places that are near that I've actually gave you for your allotment of land, he said, man, thoroughly destroy them, get rid of all of them. But he said there are other lands far off that are not necessarily your allotment, where I want you to be stationed at as a nation and rule the rest of the world from. Because remember in Scripture, he says the whole world is given unto you. The thing was, we just never got the whole earth. We're going to get the earth. So it was a situation where it was like, look, this is your land, your allotment. You will have other people that have their various different allotments, but you are still to go and conquer these places and rule over these people. Certain people you'll be able to have certain relations with. You'll be able to have functional relationships and even good relationships with. Some of them, you're just going to put them under tribute. And that's exactly what they were doing. All right. I think that was all I wanted from that. Let's go into a few things. Kind of want to, I might as well go through that. You had situations of expulsion where the Israelites were expelled from different places because of, same thing that we read about earlier. People didn't necessarily like the fact that many Israelites still wanted to stick to the religion of their fathers. So, other so-called religions, other doctrines began to come up. And people had an issue, with the Israelites trying to remain true to the heritage of their forefathers. All right. So they began to expel, the Israelites from different places. One of the ones that people more so know about is the one in 1492 in Spain with Isabella and Ferdinand. Right. But what happened is, I know a lot of times we hear the history of how Esau was chased into the Caucasus Mountains, as if every single Edomite was chased into the Caucasus Mountain of Georgia, Russia. That is not historically true. Many of them were, but many of the Edomites also went into the various different places, especially within Europe. All right. And over the state of hundreds of years, they would have skirmishes with the Israelites and skirmishes with some of the other nations. You had some Africans, even some Arabs that were in some of these places. But what you'll find is there was a dominant Israelite presence throughout what we would know as the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. So at the tail end of that, you started seeing, starting like the 1100s all the way down into the 1400s, they started to expel the Israelites from these different places. So the Israelites began to scatter even more into different places. Even over there, if you paid any attention, it says some went from Portugal into Brazil, which corroborates what I showed you guys earlier. The first ships that came into the Americas actually came out of Europe. But you also have to understand that you already had Israelites. Well, this was later in time, but you had Israelites in the Isles, in the, what we would know today as the United Kingdom. You had Israelites in France. You had Israelites in Germany. You had Israelites in Poland and Lithuania. All right. And another thing is the expulsions pretty much were going on from the 1100s all the way to the 1600s. Then you started seeing so-called white people coming into power. You see that over there. It says the kingdom of the Khazars. One thing that we got to understand is Esau literally, and I'm going to show this to you today, Esau literally came up with nothing of his own. We say that Esau was the original Greeks. He was not the original Greeks. To be honest, we give him Rome. We say, well, at least Esau has Rome. You're going to find out today that Esau, he wasn't even the original Roman. Roman culture was not his. All right. Even with him coming up and finally seizing power again as the Ottoman Turks and taking on the names of various different Germanic tribes, those tribes were ours first, were Israelite tribes. All right. But through not only fighting in different areas, but also just like Haman, getting in good with, certain governments and, becoming soldiers and diplomats, so on and so forth, they began to find their way back to the top. All right. So I want to talk about one particular people that a lot of you guys probably haven't heard about, the Etruscans. How many of you guys have heard of them? Okay. I don't want to butcher this, but I believe it's pronounced Utraria, all right, which was the land of the Etruscans, all right? So it says, lived at the top of the boot-shaped Italy, all right? It says the Etruscans made their home in this part of Italy from 1200 BCE. That can kind of fluctuate. I've heard 1200, I've heard 900. But one thing that you're going to find out about the Etruscans, right, were that they weren't Edomites. And as a matter of fact, even with Japheth originally inhabiting various different places in Europe, as they began to, not only as they began to be pushed out, but even living amongst them, you had Israelites that began to migrate into those different areas. It says until they were conquered by the Romans in 300 BCE. A lot of Roman culture and knowledge came from the Etruscans. So you got another map right there. So these are some images of the Etruscans. They were a people of color. They were bearded. And they had a whole lot of resemblance to the Israelites. And what you'll find out, most of what we know to be Roman culture already existed with them prior to Rome taking on that culture. You got right there Etruscan man with Latin Roman dancer. Got another image. Somebody say something? Like three? I'll take a picture of it. Some other images right here. So-called Negroid features. And right here you have a painting, Etruscan tomb painting, sacrifice of the Trojan captives. Now, question, how many of you guys have been up to USC? And you've seen the Trojans that they have, the statues, right? Did those Trojans look anything like the dude that's on the ground getting his neck cut or the dude over there? Do they look anything like that? Why is that? So when you look in history, you'll find out that the Etruscans and the Trojans were actually of the same people, but you had tribal warfare, so to speak. As a matter of fact, get that for me. Did we get Matthew yet? Matthew 12 and 25.
That's what you want?
Yep. We haven't read that yet, right?
No.
Did we read that already?
12 and 25, though.
Yeah.
Matthew chapter 12, verse 25. And Yahushua knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand.
So the crazy thing is, Israelites ruled Europe for the better part of 1,000 years, actually a little bit more than 1,000 years. How did we fall? Well, we fell because we had a lot of division. We had a lot of Israelites that had their own kingdoms, their own tribes, and you had tribal warfare. And they fought one another, they conquered one another, so on and so forth. You had different situations where they lived in peace. Like you had a long period of time in the Iberian Peninsula, where like in Al-Andalus, Cordova, Granada, where you have a long history of, Israelites living amongst each other with different beliefs. They had, some of them were actually, as they would call it, practicing Judaism, which is really just, for the most part, keeping the laws of the Bible. Some of them were quote unquote Christians, right? Some of them were Muslims, right? So let me be more specific. A lot of times when they say they were observing Judaism, they didn't necessarily accept Christ. Then you had those that did accept Christ. We actually accept Christ. Then you had Islam that came to the front with Muhammad, and you had a lot of Jakes through a guy by the name of Mansa Musa, who really put Islam on the map. Mansa Musa happened to be, from what I've researched, of our people. And if it had not been for Mansa Musa, Islam would not be what it is today. It's crazy because we even made Islam acceptable. Prior to the Israelites actually buying into Islam, Islam was not a big deal, all right? So you also have situations, the original fresco of this, it came out of France, but it's actually at the Getty Museum. I've seen this with my own eyes. And I forgot the brother's name, the Sicilian. It starts with the E. And then the other one's name is Darius. He was a Trojan man. And you see what them brothers look like, right? Brothers got afros, dark skin, muscular. These were gladiators, Roman gladiators. They were slaves. And they would pit us up against one another. All right? Here's the thing. Prior to Alexander, a lot of people think that our people really didn't end up in Greece until we were taken, I guess, as slaves by the Greeks. But prior to what we usually know as or acknowledge as the Greeks, which are the Edomites that came into power around 333 BC, we already had Israelite presence in Greece. All right. Right there, you got the head of a man, and that's around 400 BC. And you got the brother over there. He's got the Latin name, but they said that they believe that he was of a Greek origin. And I think I have to apologize for some information that I've put out there before, because Esau didn't even start the Olympics. The Olympics was already up and going prior to Alexander coming into power, prior to the Edomites coming into power. So this is an ancient Greek vase depicting Olympic runners, circa 525 BC. So you already had Jakes that was running and doing things they wasn't supposed to be doing. They would love to be naked. Of course, that's unlawful.
Hey, that was it, man. Darius and Atlantis.
Yeah. Izar pulled it up because he actually went to Entellus, Darius and Entellus, with the two brothers that was boxing, the gladiators. So, if anything, you could say the original Greeks look like this. You also had a people called the Minoans, who actually resemble the Polynesian people of the day, who we believe to be Japheth. But in that land, you also had these people with Negroid features, right? I'm going to try to read that. It's kind of small. It says, said to be the Cyrenian, which is Libya, King Arcesalis. So this is about 565 to 560 BC. But this was found in Eutria, which is the Etruscans' land, which is in Italy. And this was a depiction of Etruscans along with them, because they were also saying that these people amongst these different places were actually of the same stock. Then you got the glorious Holy Roman Empire. That on his shield is the official logo, I guess, of the Holy Roman Empire. That's what they bared on their flags, on their shields, so on and so forth. And what does that man look like? Does he look like a so-called Edomite, or a so-called white man, I should say? Absolutely not. Brother got a nappy fro. Indeed, indeed. But look how he's dressed. He's dressed like a nobleman. Unfortunately, you've seen a lot of situations during that time where Israelite men loved themselves some Edomite women. So literally they would have harems upon harems of Edomite women slaves. They would take the women and the children as slaves. They would train up the children, to do various different things, to be soldiers. And they would take the women and actually utilize them as sex slaves. And you did have a whole lot of quote unquote mulatto and mulatto populations birthed out of that. All right. So it says over there, Roman mosaic of black Roman soldier embracing the white woman, found at Lowham, Somerset, UK, United Kingdom, circa 340 AD. Some images of Israelites in Rome. You got the little Roman boy right there, about 200 AD. You have the bronze portrait bust of a lady in Iberia, which is in Spain. And this one gonna trip you out. Who he look like? You ever seen that movie? Don't be, yeah. Yeah, that's a throwback hairstyle. You should get your hair like that out.
Kodak Black rock that hairstyle now.
Yeah, he do. He look like that. And this was in Italy, man. This was in Italy. Israelite conquerors of Rome, a guy by the name of Septimius Severus ended up becoming a Roman emperor. And they were able to successfully take over the Roman Empire. The other guy on the coin minted, his name is Persinius Niger. That's where you get the word nigger. It means black. He was surnamed Black because he was so black. Had very broad Negroid features. Both of them, yeah, that's a Jake too. That's Septimius Severus. There was actually another Jake by the name of Claudius Albinus that he was also, because they were all trying to fight to have rulership over the Holy Roman Empire. Septimius Severus ended up being the victor. And you ended up having a dynasty come up out of Septimius Severus. So let's read a little something. It says Israelites in Iberia, France, and Britain. Let me see where I want to start from. It says that the Africans under Badaricus, a Latinized name, who entered Spain approximately 1000 BC. There were thousands of African soldiers who entered northern Italy, where they ruled for about 10 years, 217 BC to 207 BC. So there were already Israelites that were already coming into Europe even prior, you know what I'm saying, to the quote unquote New Testament time. It says the Roman occupation of England under the African emperor Septimius Severus, who brought into England from Rome and from his home in Numidia, because he was actually born in North Africa, right? It says North Africa, large contingents of African officials and soldiers around 200 AD. For more complete information on this event, consult Burley and Ben Yochanan. We must not forget about the 700 years of African Moorish domination over the Iberian Peninsula. Now, you got to understand, when they say African Moorish, this is not talking about exclusively, quote unquote, as we know today, African people. These were talking about Israelites, all right? Especially when you get into the history of the Moors, which that's not what this class is really about. But again, remember that Iberia literally comes from Ibar, which is Hebrew. That's Eber, all right? That's where the word Hebrew comes from. That was the land of the Hebrews, that peninsula. It says, and southern France, which is also known as Gaul, right? It says 711 to 1492 AD, all right? It says the African presence in the British Isles is either acknowledged or totally avoided by those scholars who do research in this area. So what they're admitting right here, they're showing you that a lot of times these scholars, they purposely overlook the history of our people in Europe and all these different places. So Israelites in Gaul or France, it says the Celts occupied that portion of the European continent which the Romans referred to as Gaul, which is France. It says the Romans were at war with the Celts constantly for 8 centuries, from the earliest rise of Rome until the assault of Rome by the Celtic chief Alaric in AD 410. So kind of some of what Amon was speaking about was the case, but you had a situation where the original Roman Empire, the ones that we call the original Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman Empire, you know, they were at odds with a lot of the different Israelite tribes all over. Then finally, you know, our people came into power. You know, it was a little bit of friction, but they were able to basically absorb the Germanic tribes because they were the same people. It says Roman culture reached its peak in terms of territory controlled in AD 350. After which it was necessary to withdraw troops from Britain to defend retreating Roman forces on the European continent. As the legions of Rome withdrew, the Celts took their place. The Celts were a fearless and high-spirited people. They rushed into war as if they were rushing into games, so they wasn't no joke. A Celtic baby was first fed with food from the tip of a sword. They was cold-blooded. A kind of baptism into the faith that the child should eventually die in battle. The Celts were not only warlike, they were vain. Sound like Israel today. They loved jewelry. Men and women were fond of fashion, clothes, ornamentation, and display. They love drinking, particularly on celebrations and holidays. It sounds like some jakes. So it's kind of crazy because you look at all of this stuff about the Celts, like Boston Celtics, you see the little Edomite, you see that bastard, what's his name, Conor McGregor?
Conor McGregor.
He claims that stock, you know, being of the Irish, you know, of the Welsh and the Celtics, and a lot of times they make it seem like they had it hard. Nah, that was our people. Israelites in the United Kingdom. It says in this book, Folklore as an Historic Science, George Gourmet asserts that the original inhabitants of the Isles were not Celts. So you got to be careful, because when you're reading this, you got to be able to read it in its proper context. So when it says not Celts, speaks specifically talking about Edomites, a vague term used by most European scholars to mean a non-Teutonic Aryan white. Gourmet goes on to affirm that these original inhabitants were not only non-Celtic, but also non-Teutonic and philologically allied with people which spoke a non-Aryan language. This is about as far as European can go without saying bluntly that the people were Afroid, and incurring the ire of his European colleagues. Charles Squire, in his book Celtic Myth and Legend, is more specific. He states that the earliest of the races to inhabit the Isles were short, swarthy. We heard that word before, right? They were people of color, dark-haired, dark-eyed, and long-skulled. Its language belonged to the class called Hamitic. And we got to be careful with that, because a lot of times they call our language a Phoenician language, right? Which would be a Hamitic language. It says, and it seems to have come originally from some part either of Eastern, Northern, or Central Africa. So we're talking about the United Kingdom. So that's why it's not far-fetched. People look at you funny when you tell them that King James was a so-called black man or a man of color. But history shows that that was the case. During the time of King James, by the time he ruled in the early 1600s, that was towards the very end of our people in rulership in various different places in Europe. By the way, King James, his name, James, is also one and the same as Jacob. And you got a lot of history with that. You know, I forgot what it's called. I think the Jacobite Wars, you know, and the people, how they were really supportive of King James. So it says the original Celts were not Edomites. Both Gourmet and Squire contend that this race has never been completely eradicated from the Isles. This contention is upheld by the Roman historian Pliny, who first saw the Britons in the 2nd century AD and described their complexions as Ethiopian. So it was a lot of stuff that I wanted to put in here, but just I wouldn't have been able to get through it all. So when you see the term Ethiopian, Ethiopian literally basically translates to someone of color. But you had all types of different peoples that they gave the term Ethiopian to, that also had other terms that went along with them being Ethiopian, even in some cases prefixes that let you know that they were people from various different places or tribes. All right. It says this description is further validated by Claudian, who described the victory of the Roman general Theodosius over the natives as he subdued the nimble blackamoors. So Esau always tell on himself. He try to hide the history, but it gets put out there. No claim, of course, is being made to suggest that all Britons at this point in history were Africoid. On the contrary, successive waves of immigrants had probably produced a heterogeneous population. While on the subject of Roman historians, Mention should be made of the earlier penetrations into Central and Northern Asia, Europe, cited by James, referring to the conquest of Senusert I and Tutmosis III. Knowledge of these or similar thrusts from the Nile Valley may account for Tacitus, which was a historian, revelation that he found the worship of Isis among the Germanic tribes in Central Europe. That was another thing of all these different deities, Isis, Diana, Hercules. It wasn't coincidental that all of these different deities bear the resemblance of our people. The original versions of these deities did not look like Edomites. They were worshiping our people. And even to this day, they still continue to worship images that look like us, especially in terms of the papacy today. Even though Esau obviously controls the papacy, they still worship a black Madonna and black images of Yahweh Shai. It says, Isis among the Germanic tribes in Central Europe, and this he couldn't explain. Squire also reveals that some of the Celtic gods in Britain show non-Aryan origins. All right? Non-Aryan meaning non-white. The term Aryan comes from Edomites that were a part of the Persian Empire, Iran. All right? So here you have an image. It says family crest from Britain with prominent Africoid features. Last century. Ooh, this one kind of hard to read. Western Islands of Scotland. And I've been doing a pretty decent job, man. It's kind of hard for me to see some of this stuff. My eyes ain't what they used to be. Islands of Scotland. Your eyes worse than mine, man.
I can see good up close.
Scotland, that's all we need to know. And we know that Scotland is a part of the UK. So you want to look what, it's all good, don't trip. You want to know what the Scott, unless you just got something to prove.
It says something good on there, right?
Yeah.
It says, Western Isles of Scotland.
Oh, you didn't press something, man.
I didn't push nothing.
Go ahead.
Okay, from the Western Isles of Scotland, he remarked that the complexion of the native sky was, for the most part, black. Of native of Juro, he said that they were generally black. Of Aryan, excuse me, black, and of Aran, that they were generally brown and of a black complexion.
So even with that, it said brown and of a black complexion, meaning dark in color, all right? And look at those features. This is the UK we're talking about. What's so crazy about it, if you go to, just like Raheem spoke about back in the days, they got a chance to go out there. What kind of images did you see all around? What kind of images did you see? What kind of royal crest did you see? What did the people look like? Exactly. You said, what's that? He said a lot of it they removed now, but back then, what year did y'all go out? 01? For sure. But out there is more common knowledge of how great our people were in Europe. Over here, they don't teach us that at all. I know this ain't the most, smack you in the face type, exciting type class, but this history is important because a lot of us, we never get this history over here. You'll never get this history with the public education over here in the United States.
Also, too, being with that said, I know some brothers, they knew a woman. She was young. She was from Europe. And she said this information is readily for the public over there. So she already knew who we were when we told her we was Israelites. So she wasn't surprised at all. She was like, it's crazy because over there, they teach us this information. But when I come to the States, which is United States, they hide this information from y'all. And she told us why, to keep us dumb and ignorant of who we are. So we won't go back and claim our original land. And this was coming from a young Edomite.
So a lot of times they talk about the different wonders of the world, and they say, okay, well, Esau got one. They got Stonehenge. Not even Stonehenge. Let's read about this. It says, many scholars maintain that ground burials are primarily a trait of sedentary architectural people and not of wandering hunters and gatherers. Ground burials have been identified as characteristic of the non-Aryan Africoid types of this early period, while the nomadic, Teutonic, and other Aryan types who were hunter and gatherers or semi-nomadic pastoralists practice cremation. Authors who affirm this relationship include Squire, Gomez, Atkinson, and Diop. In his two-cradle proposition, makes the most conclusive statement on the subject. Interestingly enough, ground burial practices are linked to the erectors of Stonehenge and other megaliths throughout Britain and the rest of Europe by Squire, Gomez, and Atkinson. Atkinson also takes note of beakers and other artifacts placed in the graves of these people. It must be noted that the same heavy transport techniques needed to construct the pyramids and the massive temples of the Nile Valley were also utilized to construct the megaliths of Europe. Godfrey Higgins believes Stonehenge to be a religious monument dedicated to the Africoid Buddha and built by his black-skinned disciples from India. I wish I would have put an image in here, but I didn't. So when you get a chance, if you've never seen Stonehenge, look it up. You even had Israelites in Russia. Extensive research proved futile for further empirical information about the Colchians, which were actually people of color. Herodotus, it seems, may very well be the only historian to provide detailed information about them. Even Strabo glosses over the subject. It is difficult to believe that the Russian historians are not familiar with the history of Herodotus, since it was published in 447 BC, first in Greek, then in Latin, and afterwards in many, many languages. Yet, the Russian historians still emphasize that the first known blacks appeared in the country in the 17th century as slaves and pampered servants in the court of the czars and mansions of the aristocrats, a vogue which have become popular in Western Europe and Turkey. So you see how they maintain the lies? Israelites were in these areas in BC, way before the Edomites started inhabiting these various different places. It says it was in connection during the reign of Peter I, known also as Peter the Great, 1682 to 1725, that destiny led the way to another term for blacks to contribute to the culture of Russia, but this time as individuals. So you have many of what they would call the Russian icons. This is just one of many. And those people happen to be people of color. The guy, the remains happen to be of St. Nicholas, the one that you call Santa Claus, was a real saint, an Israelite. The only saints were the Israelites, according to the Bible. Let me just share with you a couple more. We don't have much time. You can actually write some of these down. Write down Book of Acts, chapter 17, verses 1 through 2, and verses 10 through 17. You know, and that shows, you know, Israelites in Thessalonica. which is and Berea, which are both in Macedonia. Athens, also in that same area, in which are now in, I guess, modern day Greece. Let me see if I can go back to a map to show that. What's up?
Don't you have a picture of Constantine being black?
Yeah, I did, but I didn't put it on there.
You should put that one.
I should have put it on there. I didn't know. Yeah. He wanted me to show you the black image of Constantine the First. Trying to get a good map. All right, I guess that's pretty decent. So as you can see, some of those places like Corinth and Athens, all in the place that we now know as Greece, Berea. Above it was Macedonia. All right, Thessalonica was originally in Macedonia. Philippi. You can also write down real quick. Go to 1 Maccabees chapter 12.
1 Maccabees chapter 12, verse 1. Now when Jonathan saw that the time served him, he chose certain men and sent them to Rome for to confirm and renew the friendship that they had with them. He sent letters also to the Lacedaemonians and to other places for the same purpose.
He's seen that long word. He's like, man. Drop down to verse, I want 20 through 22.
Verse 20. Verse 20. And this is the copy of the letters which...
Verse 20.
Oh, yeah, 20. My bad. Verse 20. And Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias, the high priest, greeting. It is found in writing that the Lacedaemonians and the Jews and brethren
are brethren. So who are the Lacedaemonians? Anybody know? You ever seen 300? The Spartans. Those are the Lacedaemonians. They had the looks like a upside down V. That's the L, Greek L, that stood for the Lacedaemonians. They were one and the same as the Spartans. And these were actually Israelites, if you didn't know that. Yeah. Now the crazy thing, even though they was Israelites, they had some moments, man. They be fighting naked and had some stuff that I don't really approve of. But yet and still, those was our brethren. Yeah. And they was some bad boys in terms of fighting. Go ahead and finish that off.
And that they are of the stock of Abraham. Let me keep going.
Yep.
Now therefore, since this is come to our knowledge, ye shall do well to write unto us of your prosperity.
So it was crazy because in a lot of different situations, Israelites had went into these different places and low-key had forgotten who they were. And they was like, man, now that we know that we the same people, you got to let us know about your prosperity. Keep us up to date. And that's what it was. So you had Israelites that had already been in Europe for some time, even prior to various different captivities. And one happened to be the Spartans. It's crazy because now you see everything Spartan and you see these Edomites. But the Spartans, a lot of them, they was braided up, dark skin, crazy, bearded up. They didn't look like those Edomites that you see on 300. All right. Write down. As a matter of fact, go to Romans chapter 1 and verse 7. Just want to get a little bit of biblical proof of what I'm saying so you don't think I'm blowing smoke. Romans chapter 1 and verse 7.
Romans chapter 1 verse 7. To all that be in Rome, beloved of Yahweh, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from our Lord.
So you even have the saints in Rome. Go to Acts chapter 18 and verse 2.
Acts 18?
Yep.
Acts chapter 18, verse 2. And found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Patras, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to be departed from Rome, and came unto them.
So then you had Israelites such as Aquila, and those that had to depart, that's called the what? That's called expulsion. They had to leave up out of Rome. So there were expulsions even prior to the 1100s. All right. These are things that were happening throughout history. But you had Israelite communities also in Italy, Rome, all throughout Europe. Go from there. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 1.
First Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, called to be an apostle of Yahushua, through the will of Yahweh, and Sosthenes, our brother, unto the church of Yahweh, which is at Corinth, to them that are sanctified in Christ Jesus, called to be saints, with all that in every place call upon the name of Yahweh. On the name of Yahushua our Lord, both theirs and ours.
So these were saints in Corinth. Like you see up there, Corinth was in what? Yeah, what part of Europe? Greece. What we now know is Greece. See, Corinth is right up over there. That's Greece. That's Asia Minor over there. That's Europe, Greece in particular, and above it is Macedonia. All right. Go last one, Philippians chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 1. I hope y'all learned something. That was too much. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 1. Yep. Make sure, man, all of the soldiers should have atlases, right? Okay. Invest in an atlas. Because, you know, the reality of it is, a lot of us, we don't have the means to do all the traveling we would probably want to do. Some of us may not ever get a chance to, in this particular world, travel outside of the country. All right. So with that being said, one thing that you do want to have, you want to have an atlas, something that you can look at and see, oh, this is where this is at. This is where that's at. Get familiar. Don't just read the scriptures and hear about these different places and hear about these different books and be oblivious as to where these places are actually at. You want to know your history, all right? And it'll bring it to life and give you more understanding when you take that extra step to do so, all right? Philippians chapter 1 and verse 1.
Verse 1, Paul and Timotheus, to the servants of Yahushua, to all the saints of Yahushua, which are at Philippi, with the bishop and deacons.
So let's see if you can find Philippi on there. And that's where? Where is it at? In what? In Macedonia. Good job, good job. All right, let me give you them references real quick for Barack shoot me.
Before.
And if you really want to find out specifically which one is which, then just get with me. The books that I use, African Presence in Early Europe, edited by Ivan van Sertima. A number of different pages on there. I can give you those. Blacks in Antiquity by Frank M. Snowden Jr. Before Columbus by Dr. Samuel D. Marble. Nature Knows No Color Line by J. A. Rogers. Last but not least, The Penguin, Historical Atlas of the Medieval World by Andrew Jotsit. Oh, man, I'm going to spell this one. Capital JOTISCHKY. And Carolyn Hull, HULL. And that's it. Any questions?